So I would tell them a lot about evaluations right from the start. I would say, like, this is the best possible thing I can do for you. If you have a supervisor who doesn't do an evaluation for you, like, then they're not invested in you. So we're gonna meet in a couple of days and we're gonna have an evaluation and we're gonna chat about how things are going, and we're gonna do it in 1 month and then a little bit longer after that. I think just prepping them for, like, this is nothing to be scared of.
I'm Nicholas Bartlett, co-owner of the world's first popcorn board game cafe, living in Fulton, Missouri, and you're listening to the Vance Crowe Podcast.
Welcome back to the podcast. I'm glad you're here. Longtime listeners of the podcast might know that I am the middle child of 7, and my 6 siblings are spread all throughout the world, and they are fascinating and interesting people. Most of them are significantly less extroverted than I am, and they all have their own projects. They're all things that they work on, things that they are experts in. And today, the sibling that is probably most like me, and probably the person that I've learned so much from about communications, is my sister Kelly. She is going to come on today to talk about a book that she wrote that I think is going to be of particular interest to a lot of my listeners. She has studied and has performed at the highest levels of teaching young people, people that are having their first job that they've ever had as a professional. And she knows how to get them to think like a professional, how to become an adult, and to help managers overcome what she calls the curse of knowledge, where you have been doing something for so long that you forget how to teach somebody how to do it. So I think many of you will find this conversation interesting and insightful. And if you're managing anybody or going through the hiring process, or maybe you're a person that is going into the professional world, you will probably find this conversation and her book, Supervision, quite interesting. Before we go to the interview, I'm going to bring up the Articulate Ventures Network. This was a group that I started because I had so many people asking how could they support the podcast. So with Ben Anderson, who has become a good friend and actually business partner, I decided to throw up the Articulate Ventures Network. I thought I'd throw up a couple classes and maybe have some meetings. But as it turns out, this group is becoming something much more than I ever expected. And in fact, is becoming something of a community that I think so many of us have always wanted. Some shelter from the storm of social media, a place where you can go and practice all of those things that allow you to become a leader, where you get to try out your ideas, you get to say them out loud and get feedback and learn how to become a better speaker and how to give better feedback. This is a group that I have no intention of growing to be huge. I don't want the numbers to scale quickly. What we're doing is we're looking for people that are interested in joining a community and making themselves better and contributing towards making the group better. And I think one of the things that the group is coming to the realization of is, if you want to make a difference in the world, help other people learn how to express the ideas that they have, learn how to get better and how to open up your ideas to criticism so that you can tighten what you think. This is a really neat group, and we are just at the forming stages. And if you want to be one of those people that helps us set up the culture, that helps us choose the books like the one over there, 7 Pillars of Wisdom, which is the book we're going to read for book club over a long period of time. This month, we're reading Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. But you can do a lot more than that. You can take classes, you can throw up presentations that you know you have to give for a professional setting and get feedback, or you can just share experiences or ideas and have people give you respectful, honest, candid feedback that helps you become a more full person. So if it's something you're interested in, go to articulate.ventures. It's a calling only for people that are really interested in becoming a real full member of the group, somebody that's going to contribute as well as think and act and explore new and exciting places. We would love to have you. So go to articulate.ventures and look into signing up. So now, without further ado, we are going to go to this fantastic, fun, interesting interview with my sister, Kelly Crowe, author of the book, Supervision. Kelly Crowe, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Vance.
So it's not ordinary for me to have my sister on, but you have done something I think extraordinary, something that a lot of people say they
Aw.
want to do and a lot of people think that they have in them, but you took something that was really important to you and took the time to write it down and make it shareable. And so you just published your book, and so I wanted to bring you on and talk all about
Woohoo!
it.
Yeah, I was writing it for years and years, but I had to really just quit my job in order to do it. I kept telling myself like I would do it, I would do it at night, I would do it later, and I just wasn't doing it. I'm sure lots of people have that same experience where they say they're going to do it or they're like slowly working on it. And then I wrote it, and we used to talk all the time when I was writing it, and I was super excited and we would bounce ideas off each other. But I like included a lot of stories in it, and I just felt really self-conscious about that. Like, I don't know, once you put something in writing down and put it out there in the world,
Oh, I know. I've
I
spent the
was
last
worried
4 days
about
having
it.
people take what I wrote and smash me all over social media. So I can only imagine when you've printed it in a book, and now that seems
Yeah,
somehow more permanent than almost anything else you can do. So why don't you talk about the book? What is the name of the book and what is it about?
sure. It's called Supervision or Supervision, and it's an innovative guide to being the supervisor when your employees are young and inexperienced. So I wrote it based on my experience at Southern Illinois University and the University of Hawaii, supervising mostly college age students. I had some older professionals that I also supervised, but mostly like big teams of different positions and different categories of students, anywhere from freshman students to senior students. Occasionally there would be a student who was non-traditional student, but mostly they were in that like 17 to early 20s age range. Some of them, this was like their first job or their first real job. And I just wrote it about um, really trying to be perceptive about what a student, what a young employee needs from their supervisor, and to try to answer those questions for you, try to get in their minds and say like, this is probably what they're thinking, this is why this happens. And then I tell like kind of how to get started, and I talk about the way that I did creative trainings with them, and I talk about the all kinds of things that I did wrong and
Yeah, I think the thing
mistakes
that
I
your
made.
book really does really, really well is it overcomes the curse of knowledge, right? Like
Yeah.
once you've been in the world and you've been working for a long time and you're like, ah, doesn't everybody just already know how to do this? And shouldn't you know when you're supposed to show up to work? And that's just common sense. And they forget that there was a time in their life when they didn't know what to do. And like they didn't even really know how to ask. And you forget, like you talk about in the book, like people are embarrassed to ask what should I do next, because they know that everybody around them thinks like, well, you should just already know what you're doing.
Yeah, I really think the concept of the curse of knowledge has been the biggest game changer for me just as a supervisor in general. I think just understanding that concept, I teach it to people all the time, and I wish that more people, especially people really high up in leadership, would remember that people are constantly new, you're constantly having new people, and also like they have these meetings where they solve things in these meetings, and then it's like, well, that's done, solved that, and so they feel like everybody knows it. No, you had this conversation with all of you and then like a few other people, but you forgot to tell the rest of us. And I really think that being conscious of that has been a huge game changer for just for having happy employees, for being successful.
Your book
Remembering that.
opens up with a very interesting way. You start talking about like basically the first day and how you should think about orienting your employees. And this is one of those things that people, I know I've been in the position where I go to hire somebody and you're thinking like, oh my God, I had to go through all this HR work. We had to hire him, now we've got him here. And then you don't think to prepare. And so maybe they have a desk that you're going to seat them at, and like that's
Yeah.
about it. So walk us through like the beginning chapter, because I think that's when I was like, oh my God, she's right. I would never have thought of these things.
Also, I talk about the kinds of things that they're trying, the kinds of things that they have questions about. I talk about the impact of really what that first day is like. When I first started at the university, well, so I started at the end of a year, and we can talk about that crazy story of how that all went. But on their first day of training, when we had a brand new year, I really wanted to help them see that, like, this is important. This first day is so important, and I see it as important too. And I'm not going to be distracted, and we're not just going to everybody grab a bagel and an orange juice. And then, like, for student housing, we usually have these big trainings. It's not like you just start by yourself. And so I ended up hosting this big banquet with actual, like, china and flowers, and had it, like, all set up so that they would see, like, oh, like, something different's going on here. And just from the second that they get there, they're like, okay, like, this is going to be different. We're not just shuffling through. Somebody's really intentionally thought about my first day and what it's going to be like. And I think, like, that's part of it. Another part of it's preparing the other people who work at the organization to say, like, hey, we have these new people coming on. This is what their job is. This is how you can help them. This is what they're not supposed to do. I think that's a big one, because other people who work at an organization are like, new people. All right, well.
Oh, there's always somebody that's like, oh, now I got my guy. I get to slide in there and get copies made and all kinds of bullshit.
Yeah, somebody to do my data entry. This is perfect.
So the thing that stuck out to me was, you get a new person and you decide, like, oh, my job is to go around and introduce them to everybody. And so you go introduce them to, like, 45 people. And there's always that joke of, like, oh, I'm not going to remember their names. But then you forget, like, actually, they're not even going to remember where the bathroom is.
Yeah.
So what's your advice there? Like, how should you introduce a new person to an office? Like, what's the way to go about this?
The best way I've found is if you can have pictures of people and then their names, and then you just give that to the employees. Some people will never look at it. You're always going to have employees who are, like, extra superstar go-getters, and they're going to go home and they're going to look at that and they're going to read that. I mean, probably you would have been like that, and just because you want to do a good job. So they're going to try to, okay, make little memory tricks for themselves, and it sets them up for success right from the start. So they're not reintroducing to themselves to somebody, like, for the second time. And then, I don't know, just kind of explaining, like, hey, this is this person, but not like a whole spiel about, like, what does this person do? Like, that's too much. Like,
yeah. And it always turns into, like, one of those things where the two people already know each other. So they're giving, like, weird compliments, and there's always inside jokes. And the other person, the new person, is sitting there. And if you're new and you've never worked at all, that's got to be like, am I supposed to be remembering this? Am I supposed to be taking notes? I don't want to take notes if I'm not supposed to. Like, I think of it as, like, you forget what it's like to want to be cool or to want to fit in because you've been in a place for so long.
Yeah, that's why I made the new guy notebook. So it's like, hey, you've got this green notebook or whatever it is, and, like, you're expected to bring it around with you, and everybody knows you're supposed to be writing stuff in it, because otherwise you look like a schmuck if you're like, oh, just a second, let me write that down. Like, you look like, but if they're like, hey, I know you're new and I know the rule and you're supposed to be writing that down, and then it takes away a little bit of the embarrassment of it.
So talk about the experience of leading big groups of young people. Like, what are the things that stick out to you that people don't realize that new people don't know, and how to get them all started and up and running?
Well, I think they come with a variety of, they're, just like anybody else, they come with a variety of knowledge and experience and excitement. I think the excitement's probably one of the best things. They're usually, like, want to do a good job, and they're not totally burnt out on, like, oh, work, like, just have to do this. Let's see how to get them started, or what do they not remember, what do they need. So one of the things I would do would be to I would train people year after year after year, and I would just, whenever they have a question, I would secretly write it down. So then I started having these, maybe like on their second day, I'd be like, hey, I'd just gather a group of new ones and say like, do you guys have any questions? And of course they'd be like, no questions, none. Then I would just pull out this magic list or try to do it from memory. Like, well, what about this? Like, would you be wondering this? And they're like, yes. And then you just keep going through the list. And I just kept asking things that people asked in the past. And they felt like it seemed like I was reading their minds, but they're just not either not comfortable asking or not thinking to ask. A lot of times new employees will save up all their questions till it's like a good time to ask. Well, like, when is a good time? They're just waiting for like, oh, just let it go. And then like too much time has passed. And then it's like embarrassing because like, well, what were you doing all this time if you didn't know?
I thought that one of the interesting parts about your book was still in the beginning was when you said like, don't forget to tell people when they're allowed to go home. And I was like,
Hell yeah.
oh yeah, because you do not want to be that guy on his first day being like, would you mind if I go home? But you also know that person doesn't have anything to do and they may like, so talk about that kind of stuff. That's the stuff that I thought your book was so mind-blowing because it was thousands of those little things that you just don't think of.
Yeah, not forgetting to tell them when to go home. And if you constantly check in with them at the end, and they're new and you check in with them, then they're going to expect that they can't go home until you check in with them. So if that's the way that the rule is, then you need to tell them not. But if it's like, no, when this time hits, like you can just go home. And you kind of forget that the way that high school is, if they're coming from high school, like they have to ask to go to the bathroom. Like they don't, we're so used to just being able to just do whatever we want to do. So I think it's a matter of like, if you want a break, can you just get up and take a break? Do you need to tell somebody? Who should you tell? Let's see. When can they, kind of just like where to be? Like they don't know like where to be while they're not doing anything. Should they just be following you around like a puppy? Should they just sit here? They get constantly told to like, oh, go fetch this or go get that. But then like, they don't know, like it takes them forever and it's embarrassing because they are wandering around. We've all done this. You're like, I'm just going to find it. I'm just going to fake it and I'm just going to figure it out. And then they're like, something that should have taken 5 minutes, like 15 minutes later, they're like, ah.
So one of the things that you're particularly good at is getting groups to come together. And I think it's because you have like a knack for understanding that people have different styles. Like I tend to just be like, oh, everybody's like me, so we're just going to do it my way. And that's something that really strikes me in the book. Like you talk a lot about the different ways that people learn and like how you can create situations where everybody can learn at their own kind of style.
Yeah, we do because I did student housing, we did so much training. We have 2 weeks of training at the beginning of the year and then 1 week in the middle of the year. That's a lot of training, probably much more than the average person has, maybe like a few days. But I think, we would do things where you get to really try it out for yourself. You get to have the experience of doing it. So we would set up these fake scenarios. Like one of the things they have to do is snake a toilet, which means like to get it unclogged if it's clogged. So we set up like a working toilet in the middle of the like outdoors and had it hooked up to water. And then they would just take turns, like go over, like it's your turn and you have to just get in there and do it. And if nobody makes you do that, you're like, okay, like I can do it. Sure. Like, no, you don't get to move on to the next station until you do it. Because there's going to come a time when you have to do this by yourself. And you've said, like, if we let you go, then you're not going to know. So being just sort of forced to really try everything and then seeing their other coworkers also trying it and just having I think a lot of new employees don't have experience. So you have to create experiences for them to be able to know, like, if you had a new employee that was helping you out as a new dad, like let's say they work in some store, they have no idea for the most part, like what your experience would be. Like if this is like one of your first outings and like things are like you're having things aren't going as planned.
I'm sleeping about an hour and a half a night. Yeah, I'm like, and I don't need small talk. I just need the answers.
They don't know what you need because they've not been in that position. And that's the situation for all kinds of stuff with new employees. They've just never experienced it before.
I think one of the things that becomes difficult for people that are a first-time manager or first-time managing other people is that you don't even really know how to do things like give them feedback or how much to correct them, because you don't want to be hovering, but at the same time, you don't want like they may be doing things wrong. And if you yourself never had a good boss, you don't really know how to give the kind of feedback. So you end up becoming like, the abusive parent that, the abused child that becomes an abusive parent because you don't know any different. And it's kind of the same way as with a manager.
Yeah. It's hard. I think that line in the beginning is especially hard because you don't want to break their spirit, like by correcting them, but they have to know how to do it correctly. So I would tell them a lot about evaluations right from the start. I would say, like, this is the best possible thing I can do for you. If you have a supervisor who doesn't do an evaluation for you, like, then they're not invested in you. So we're gonna meet in a couple of days and we're gonna have an evaluation and we're gonna chat about how things are going, and we're gonna do it in 1 month and then a little bit longer after that. I think just prepping them for, like, this is nothing to be scared of, this evaluation. We want to talk about these things, and you want somebody to tell you, like, hey, like, how's it going? And like, one thing for new employees is to let them tell you themselves, because they know. Like if you ask them, like, so what's not going so well? Sometimes it feels better to have that chance yourself than to have somebody explain to you, like, what you already know.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Well.
Like, and if you have a chance to say it in an environment where you don't feel like you're going to get in trouble for it, like, it's almost a get out of jail free card. So you're able to be like, I'm not getting along with that other person, or I don't have enough time to do the things I want to do or need to do. Then they don't feel like they have to hide it. And when you get into that hiding relationship, that's when things all go sideways.
Yeah. I also started asking them to give me feedback, positive feedback on their coworkers, which I think that I learned a ton. I learned so much by asking them, like, hey, tell me something that you noticed about one of your coworkers that they're doing well. I noticed that I was giving the wrong people credit for things and nobody was saying anything. You just assume, like, the person who always takes care of stuff is the one who took care of it. And there's just so much as a supervisor that you don't see happening, like, and you just wouldn't. So they have a chance to say, like, hey, like, so-and-so totally took care of this and it was awesome. And then when you give them that feedback, it feels really good. Like if somebody says, like, hey Vance, I was just talking to one of your coworkers yesterday and they know, they like said this, that you totally took care of this, and they did a great job. You feel like, really? I didn't even know they noticed that.
Yeah, and then you can integrate it into who you are, right? Like when you start saying, like, oh, that little thing that I did, maybe it was an accident or maybe it just kind of happened that way. Now all of a sudden you can be like, oh, that was so worth it, and nom nom nom, it feels so good to get these compliments. Nom nom nom, how can I get more?
I know.
So I have this Articulate Ventures network. So some of the people that listen to the podcast, they join this network. And one of the things that we've started doing is a speaking gym. So once a week, a group of people get together and 2 people give a talk and 2 people give feedback, and they vote on who gave the best talk and who did feedback. And then we do kind of off the cuff answers or questions. And so it's a little bit like Toastmasters, but it's in this digital domain. And you can also, when you're giving feedback, comment on the content of what they're talking about, which is a little bit different, right? And one of the things that people have reached out to me afterwards and said was, I learned more by giving other people feedback than I did giving a speech and having somebody give me feedback. Because now all of a sudden I have to start processing through, like, what did they do well and how can I frame that and how can and I think that that's one of the lost arts of communication. Like, by putting people in the position where they have to give other people feedback, it ends up becoming far more a mirror about you, because you're sitting there being nervous and like, you're like, I don't want them to reject it. What if they're mad at me? But I also want to tell them something important. And I've been told that if I don't tell people something important, that I'm doing something wrong, but I don't know how to. And like, I think that the feedback mechanism is one of those things that the high up boss can do a lot of good for the middle management if they are teaching them how to give feedback and then giving them opportunities over and over and over and over again to do it. So you get over that adrenaline rush and you start to see like, when I feed it to them this way, they take it a lot better than the other way.
Yeah, and I think like if you are in an environment that gives a lot of feedback, you're more willing to take it. Like if that's just kind of what the culture is like, or that group is like that, you just know that people are going to give you feedback, especially if you really value it. Like, I don't know, sometimes with Toastmasters, every once in a while somebody's giving you feedback and you're like, I don't think that you're great. So I don't, your feedback doesn't mean I'll take it, but it doesn't mean the same. I wish that this person would have given me feedback because I really want to know what they would say.
One of the things that we added in this week is everybody in the group now throughout the week, as they're thinking about what was said, at some point, something you heard during speaking, Jim, is going to pop into your head. And now you're responsible, if you think of something, to write that person and say, hey, I was going through this part of my day and this happened, because that ends up reinforcing the content of what people are saying. And it starts making them go like, really? That made a difference? That was just something I threw in there. I didn't think. And by getting people into that mindset, I think this is something that you're really good at, of helping people understand when they did something that had an impact on you. One, just by you recognizing it, it makes your life better. It's just more rich and more full. But by telling somebody else, you just like light them up and you build a bond with somebody that you might otherwise be like, I don't have a reason to contact them or be in touch with them. And then that relationship can start building and developing in really fascinating ways.
Yeah, especially if you say something really specific. So they're like, that, like exactly what you're saying. And I think that you're onto something about like just doing it automatically, because we can kind of, I don't know, you have an idea and it feels like you've already done it. Like, oh, I should really tell that person how great they were. Good for me for thinking about that. But then you didn't do it.
Yeah, I often tell people like that want to do journal writing. Like, so people have asked me before, like, oh, I sit down to write a journal and I just don't know what to write. And I'm always like, well, one way you can start is, instead of writing it for yourself, write a note to somebody else about a thought you had about something they did, and try and make it positive or make it as a positive experience. If you do that a few times, and I often will write letters and take photographs of them, and then later I come back and I read the photograph letter, and it is just as good as any journal entry, because the thing that I'm expressing to them was something that I felt inside of me. And I think people oftentimes, when they're doing something for other people, it doesn't feel as like stultifying. It doesn't paralyze you like when you're sitting at a blank page where you're like, I don't know, if I write this, am I going to want to read it in 20 years? Probably not. I guess I'll just quit.
Yeah. I think with our memories are bad too. Like we forget the specifics, and the specifics are what really matter. So like when giving somebody feedback, I started telling people when I do public speaking, I would just say, we're not going to do like a formal evaluation at the end. I'm not doing that. Just while I'm talking, write down 5 things. You're not going to remember more than 5 things anyway. Just something hits you, you just jot it down. And then you just write to me like just 5 things that you either got from this, or that you liked, or that you have a question about. Just jot down 5 things, because by the time you get to the end of an evaluation, like a speech, and then they're going to evaluate you, like, you're like, what were they even, like, I don't remember what basically you're getting feedback on the end, because they don't remember if it's an hour-long speech, really, like the specific content.
Oh, that's really clever. That's really clever. So there's a subject that you and I can never recount it for people, but it's something that always sticks out to me as a really interesting way of looking at personalities. And you talk about personality colors all the time.
Oh, yeah.
What is that all about?
So this, so the program that I learned was called True Colors, and who taught it? The Dr. Lo Hong was the vice chancellor for student affairs, and she came in and did a training session about True Colors. And what I learned in this, the major thing that's like the biggest takeaway for me, I used to have these employees who would like constantly point out when I was doing something wrong all the time. I was like, do you hate, like, is this personal? Like, I don't. So I would be standing up there in front of them, or we'd all be sitting in a circle, and I'd be telling them, like, oh, we have this idea, like, we're gonna do this new thing, it's gonna be great, and I'm so excited, and I've really thought about this, and I'm like, this is my whole idea. Like, I feel like you get like excited about ideas.
Oh, I'm
100%.
So you were describing, like, and now I know this is my wife is about to jump in here. This is exactly.
And then somebody would be like, yeah, but did you think about this? Which that's kind of okay. But they would also be like, did you know that you have a typo on the 3rd page, like 3 sentences down? I'm like, no. I mean, of course I don't want any typos. Like, that's embarrassing, and I'm super embarrassed that you pointed it out in front of everybody. But like, that wasn't the point. But then when we did this True Colors, like, that's their superpower. Like, that's their thing. They can just, that's the greens. And they can just see, they're very, very detail oriented, and they can see the flaws in something, which now that I did that True Colors, I think, like, of course, what a gift that is to have that kind of person in an organization that's going to find the flaws and that will catch me from sending out this document with typos, or kind of think about like what could go wrong, instead of being like, yeah, I know, but then like it could be great. And then,
yeah, because that's all I want to do. I just want to stay up. We're having fun, and now we're going somewhere.
Like, we'll figure out like everything as we go, and you guys are gonna love it. And then they like my style, which is orange, which I think is yours as well. I realize, like, I'm like a tornado. Like, I'm a nightmare to them. Like, they just, it's so frustrating. Like, that's like one of the stories I tell in the book is when they staged an intervention because of my style. Because I thought that we had these 2 weeks of training, and I had all these like fun things planned. Like, we'd do like fun games, and I'd surprise them with things. Like, we'd have dinner, like, but it would be up at the basketball court, or just little things that I would just surprise them with, and activities. And so I was only giving them the agenda like for that day. When they got there, they got the agenda for the day, which I was like, that's super organized of me. And like some of the staff that had been with me for a couple of years, like sat me down and were like, you're driving us insane. Like, this, we can't take it. Like, we just want to know what's going to happen, and you know what's going to happen, and you're not telling us. So we're just like so stressed out that we just get there every day and we don't know what is going to happen. Like, we don't know what to wear. We don't know like how to mentally prepare ourselves. So it's like, no, and now in my job now, I could really see, like, of course that's annoying. Of course it is. But I thought it was really fun because that's my personality type.
Yeah, like we're going on a treasure hunt and somebody's taking me on a treasure hunt.
I can't tell you like everything we're going to do, because then you won't be surprised. And they're like, we don't want to be surprised. Like, no.
So there's like the detail-oriented people, then there's the people like you and me that are, like big ideas exploding. What are the other types of people?
So there's blue, which is the like usually your caretaker people, like your people who go into nursing professions, just very empathetic and sympathetic, and they just really feel for people. And so if you're having a big meeting with all of them, they might stop and say like, but have we considered how everybody feels, and really want to get into like a whole conversation and really take it personally.
And you do not want to cross the empathy people. Oh man, if you tell the empathy people that empathy is not important, oh man, watch
yeah. And these people are very, very sweet to work with, and they're just some of like the best people that exist, out there in the world, just because they're genuinely like really caring and compassionate. And then the gold is very the gold is the person you want to give, like, do you need something organized, like organized, like don't forget, like nothing will be forgotten. The gold has probably been the gold star super student their whole lives. Like they've been in charge of all the projects. they will get it done. It will be perfect. And they, like, if it's, I don't know, we did this we had this way of like scheduling meetings, and it was worked out really well, but it was like kind of chaotic and just kind of like everybody jumping in, and Golds like took over, and I was like, you guys got this. I'm gonna step back. You're so much better at this than me. They're just like, no, we're just gonna whip this into shape. Like we get this, we're gonna get it organized, details, we'll come up with a plan, and everybody just explain the plan. And you can't, if you try to just be like, no, like we'll figure it out as we go. Like, no, no, the Golds are not having that. If you tell a Gold, like, if you said, hey, like, do you want to go for pizza tonight? And then they like decided, then we decide which pizza place we were going to go to. And then if we switched pizza places, that would be pretty bad. But like an orange person like me might say like, oh, hey, like as we're getting ready to leave, like, I heard about this new place. Do you want to go there instead? Like thinking like they'll just say if they don't want to, but like it could be fun, like, right? It could be good. And they cannot, that's terrible. Like, why would you do that? That is so rude that you would even suggest that. Like they already planned like to go to the restaurant that we talked about. Like, so they've already looked up the menu. They already have a plan. Like, so when you do that, it's not fun. but
I mean, I think
fun.
my natural personality, as you're describing all these, is I always imagine that I want to be surrounded by oranges. But then at the end of the day, I'm like, no, I don't want your orange ideas. I want my orange ideas. The details, people, quiet down. These are good ideas. Don't get in my way. So how do you manage, like, if you're trying to get together young people whose personalities aren't set, and maybe they were the gold star person when they were in high school. They don't want to be the gold star person anymore, but it's a part of their personality. So you've got all these people, they're coming together, and maybe it's not they're going into college. Maybe they're coming out of college and they're going into their first job. How do you figure out who people are and like how to orient them so that the oranges don't smash all the greens and those types of problems?
Yeah. I would do a lot of things where like it's definitely hard. I mean, and you can't just let your tendency seep in there all the time. I had them fill out a form I called it Supervising the Best You. And I would ask them questions like, what's easy about supervising you? Like, why would somebody feel like, yeah, like you're great to supervise? Like, what makes you great at your job? And then I would ask them questions like, what is challenging about being your supervisor? And make them really, I gave it to them ahead of time so they could think about it and write it down. And I would really get to know like more about what they like. And I would ask them like, what is your like supervisor pet peeves? And so I get to know like what I might be doing that's driving them crazy.
Oh, this
and
is
we do
great.
a lot of like
this is great. Group. Like, go ahead.
Yeah, no, we do a lot of getting to know each other as the group, but also realizing that from freshman to senior, like people change a lot. That's part of the process. That's supposed to happen.
So I was just thinking about the so in speaking gym, okay, we just did it earlier today, so I'm all jazzed about it. I'm super excited. But one of the exercises that we did was instead of you introducing yourself, pretend that you are someone else and introduce you as though you're, coworker or your supervisor. How do you wish that they would introduce you? And it was fascinating because finally you gave people permission to set aside the modesty and really get into what would I want somebody to say. And then after they've done that, you can say, okay, now imagine somebody ever really did say something like that to you. How would that make you feel? And now think about the next time you go to introduce someone, imagine giving them the introduction that they would always want. And those types of exercises, once you do them, you can integrate that stuff into your life, and it makes a huge difference. And so I'm hearing you do these things, and I'm like, our brains just work very, very similarly.
Yeah, that would feel really good. Especially, when you feel like somebody really gets you and they are really excited about the things. I think like you're a very perceptive person, and you often tell people like, hey, like this thing that you just did, like you're really good at that. Like you tell people that all the time. And I don't think that a lot of people have somebody in their life that, number one, recognizes it, and two, gets like super excited for the person. Like when they're like, oh, I don't know. And you're like, no, for real. Like you're really good at this, and this is how you can use it. And I think it's very sweet. It's a very sweet quality, and it makes people feel great to be understood and to be celebrated.
So we're talking about all the fun, exciting orange things, but what about the first time you're ever having to really give somebody criticism? Like they're going in the wrong direction or they're bringing the group down? Like what are the things that you learned over time to deal with those kind of stuff?
Yeah. I mean, there are different categories for that. I think some of it was I realized that I've just hired the wrong person for the job, and there's not going to be like a coming back from that. That's rough.
We've all been there.
So that's hard. And it's hard when somebody like isn't really clicking with the group. I think that's really hard to
Have
figure
you
out
ever
a way
been
to...
somebody that somebody thought, I don't think we hired the right person for this job?
Oh, not that I know of. No, I mean, like, I have hired people who, like, they're working with students and they turn out to be like dealing drugs, or, so like.
Well, I mean, if you're a drug dealer, you got to give them credit. That's a good thing to do. Go work with a bunch of students. You get it ready access
I
to a
know,
large
it's
customer
genius. I know. Yeah, I do like a lot of just I would meet with people one-on-one like a lot and just have like real chats with them. I've let somebody go who I really, really didn't want to let go. And I mean, those conversations are always really hard when you have to give that kind of feedback. But if you don't, then it impacts the whole team. Like if you don't make the decision that needs to be made, then everybody knows that too.
Yeah, and then everybody pays the price for the manager not being able to like just do what has to be done. So what was the process of writing the book like? I mean, I know because I was around when you were first starting it and being the orange, like, and you could do this and this and this, but you actually have to put pen to paper. What did you learn about yourself by sitting down and hammering out an actual book?
I think like the best thing and the worst thing that happened were the same. Like the best thing that I did was to just not say, I didn't stop myself from saying, I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do, so I'm not going to do it yet. Like, so I just started writing things down. I had a bunch of different versions of it. I would just start, I think the original book was really about training. And I considered doing one that would be just on like hiring or just getting started with employees. And instead I tried to like sort of take you from the beginning of bringing somebody on and then like training them and dealing with problems and just developing them. But had I told myself like, well, you can't really start until you have this whole thing outlined and exactly figured out, for my personality, that would not have worked. Like I couldn't have forced myself to not start writing until I had it like all organized. But that was also to my detriment in the end, because I kept constantly questioning like, well, maybe this isn't right. Maybe I should scratch this and just do this. Because I didn't really it wasn't like somebody hired me to say, write a book about training employees or write a book about supervising them.
Yeah, I think one of the hardest things for me to do is to either write something down or be creative when I'm not solving a problem. Like if I have a problem I'm solving, that's really easy to do. But if you think about writing a book, you could write about anything. It's a blank page. And so you basically have to, if you work that way, like manufacture a problem that you think will resonate with other people, that actually is the problem that they have, and yet still keep it on the tracks of being specific enough to give people actual tangible things that they can do, but generalizable enough that it applies whether they're at SIU or whatever school or not even in school.
Yeah, I think, and the more time you spend with the book, the more you're like, I don't know, does everybody already know this? But it was helpful in talking to you, because it would call you up and you'd be like, yeah, no, right on. I remember when I was a student, and like, then we would just talk about, or because you'd had a bunch of different jobs before. It's really helpful to have somebody to say like, is this something that people like would care about? Because you don't really know when you're just by yourself working on it. It's not like the podcast where you start, but then you're constantly getting feedback. So you're like, okay, well, this is what people like. This is what I like.
Well, that's 100% it. Like the hundreds of hours that I put into the podcast, I get immediate feedback. People are going to write me. I am going to hear, like, in every single episode I do, somebody has something to say, positive or negative. They've got advice. I mean, in fact, most of my friends that I've made in the last year that have come from the podcast wrote me and gave me criticism that was actually really helpful. Like, there's this guy named Joseph Ring. He's a good friend of mine now, but he wrote, and he's very much, I think he's probably agreeing. Like, he was like, hey, your audio sounds terrible in this way. And I was like, who is that guy? I want to know who that guy is. And you like, that is the experience that I got to have while doing the podcast, is the iterations that a book is frightening in a way, because you have to go the entire race and then you're done. And if you get all the way done and people are like, it wasn't really the thing that I was looking for, then you've got a problem.
Yeah, definitely.
But you do not have that problem, because so you sent me this book, and I'd read portions of it before, but never in its final form. And like, I just sat down and read it. I've been talking about it with a bunch of my friends. Like, this is an awesome, this is fantastic. And so what is the process of getting a book out into the world? You've put it out there?
Yeah. So I ended up working with different people. Like I hired an editor, and actually I hired several different editors, and I had some people that I hired for different parts of the formatting, because it's in an ebook too, which is tricky. And then through Kindle Direct Publishing, you can use their program to publish directly with your ebook. And then if you set up the formatting of your book and create a cover, then they print books on demand, which is perfect. Because before, you had to say like, anticipate. I mean, who wants to do that? Like, I don't know how many, like, that would be awful. But this way, like, if somebody orders it, then Kindle just prints it. You can sign up with it to have a deal with them. So right now they have the ebook that if you have Kindle, you can get the ebook for free. This is like a marketing thing that they do. So that's helpful if other people are trying to write a book. Kindle Direct Publishing is like great. I think was very easy process. And you can go online afterwards and you can see like who, like how many did it sell that day, and how many pages did people read on the ebook, and like who's buying, like not, you can't see who's buying it, but like how many, if you're getting like spiked, if you told a certain group about it, and then like more people go buy it.
Oh, wow. That is super interesting. That's actually got to be a little bit addictive, I would guess.
Well, if it goes well, I suppose not if it doesn't.
And so speaking of books, what was the last good book you read?
I don't know what the last good book I read. I think my favorite book is Made to Stick.
Yeah,
by Dan Heath and Chip Heath.
Why is that you told me about that book, and I think that book changed so much about the way that I communicate. So what did you like about that book?
I mean, that's just perfect for you. Like for it's a lot about communication, and how do you get people to understand what you're trying to communicate, and how can you say data in a way that people can comprehend it, and how can you say things in a way that people will remember it, like it's sticky, and they, after your talk, they'll walk away and they can't stop thinking about it, and they can't stop talking about it, and they just share with you all these examples of exactly how to do it and what works, like why does it work. And
yeah, I loved that book, and that was like the precursor to me really spending time thinking about why does some communications work and not others? Because up until that point, any college communications textbook I'd ever read, it was all so dry. And their thing was over and over again, stories and examples that were like, oh, I'll never forget that. In fact, I mean, I would say your book is written that way, because it's like, tell me how to do it, and then give me a funny story that's like, oh, I can see how that would happen. And it's just over and over and over and over again. And then that makes it so it can be applicable.
Yeah, I think the stories really help. I was reluctant to add stories, and I know you and Dan were both, our brother Dan, we're both really adamant, like you have to have the stories. The stories are what make it interesting. But I just felt like I feel very reluctant to tell other people's stories, and other people were involved in those stories. And I think that was a hard part about writing the book and telling stories. Like in the Made to Stick book, they're telling stories that they've researched and they've gathered. These are my stories, but a lot of other people were involved, but they don't get to tell their side. I just felt very self-conscious of telling people's stories, or maybe that's not how they remember it, or maybe I told too much information, like because they were my employees and you don't want to out them on things.
Yeah, I've always thought you were like way overly sensitive about that, but I appreciate it. Like if I were the person that the story was being told about, I'm sure I would have a level of sensitivity, right? And I don't know, like my own personality, like I like stories and I like telling them, and if they make me look a little bit silly, like I don't really mind that much. But I know that like if you're a gold star person and you didn't get a gold star that day, then you really don't like those stories being out there, and it would get them. But you struck a great balance here, because I think in almost all of the stories, you can always see yourself in it. And if you can't see yourself, you can see how somebody would get into that situation.
Well, that's good to hear. That's good.
So Kelly, this was a hell of a lot of fun. I've never had a sibling on, and you are somebody that I am definitely patterned to be very similar with. And this is a fun thing to do. I'll have to have you on again, and we'll talk about all kinds of other crazy things.
Kinds of stuff. Yeah, definitely. I'm curious. Like, yeah, I feel like I like to have a good conversation. It's great.
And so, if people wanted to get the book, how would they look it up?
They can look it up on Amazon. So it's Supervision. It looks like I only have
I have it right here.
Okay, perfect. Well, yeah, mine is the copy that has the gray line through it too. But and it's an innovative guide to being the supervisor when your employees are young and inexperienced. And my name is Kelly Crowe. Crow like the bird with an E, just like you. And you can just purchase it online.
Well, great, Kelly. I hope lots of people do. It is a great book, and thank you so much for coming on the
Oh,
podcast.
thanks for having me on the podcast. That was fun.